Hello everyone, welcome to the world of communication. Do you know what makes human different from animals? Yes, it is the way we communicate. I am Nitin Bhatia and our topic for today is components and process of communication and communication gap. Now, to cook any recipe, it is very important to know what all ingredients are involved and how each ingredient functions. Similarly, to understand the process of communication, we must know what are the components of communication and how each component functions. So, there are mainly six components of communication: context, sender, message, channel, receiver, and feedback. So, let us understand each of the component in detail. So, the first component is context. Every communication starts within a context. Now, what is context? Context is the environment in which communication takes place. Context refers to place, times, and circumstances in which communication is taking place. Now, the sender always chooses the type of communication keeping context as a reference. Also, he chooses the medium keeping context as a reference. Now, for example, a supervisor in a factory will use written communication to send reports to the top management, while the same supervisor will use oral communication to delegate the work among workers. Also, when we meet someone in the evening, we don't greet by saying good morning. Do we? No. We say good evening, right? Next is sender. Sender is the person who has something to convey. That something can be an idea, can be a fact, information, or it can also be a secret. So, sender can be an individual or a group of organization. A sender has to choose the proper symbol, mediums, language to convey the message. Now, the knowledge, skill, background, views, approach, and competencies of sender have a great impact on the message. Next is message. Message is the key idea which sender wants to convey. Message should fulfill the objective of communication in order to be successful. Message can be verbal or non-verbal or even the combination of both. Now, the seven C's of communication must be taken into consideration in order to make the message more effective. The next component is channel. Channel is the tool or medium through which the communication takes place between sender and the receiver. Now, the person who is interested in communicating has to choose the proper channel for sending the required information. Now, this transmission of information through channels can be either formal or informal. Choosing the right channel helps to convey the message more effectively. Now, do you know which is the richest and most effective channel of communication? Yes, it is face to face communication. The next is receiver. Receiver is the listener, reader, or observer to whom a message is directed. It is the receiver who tries to understand the message in the best possible manner in order to achieve the most desirable outcome. This person can also be referred as the recipient or destination of the information. Receiver is responsible for making the sense of the message. Receiver is the person who confirms the success of communication by giving required feedback. So this brings us to the last component of communication, which is feedback. Now, receivers are not just passive listeners of the message. They receive the message and also respond to it. This response of receiver is called feedback. It helps to ensure that the receiver has received the message and understood it in the same sense as the sender meant it. Now, feedback completes the process of communication and ensures that there has been no communication gap. So this was all from my side on components of communication. Next, my friend Diksha will help you to understand the process of communication. Over to you, Diksha.
Communication is a two-way process in which there must be two parties, the sender and the receiver. This process of communication is a 7-step procedure. First, sender. Second, encoding. Third, message. Fourth, channel. Fifth, decoding. Sixth, receiver and feedback. Sender. The communication process begins with the sender creating an idea that he plans to send to another person. The sender has to be clear about the purpose or objective of the communication. He is the person who is sending a message to the recipient. After sender, the next step is encoding. Once the sender develops an idea, the very next step is encoding. Here, he translates the information into a message where he uses certain words, pictures, or gestures, etc. before it is being conveyed. After encoding, the very next step is message. Once the encoding is finished, the sender gets the message that he intends to convey. The message can be oral, written, symbolic, or non-verbal, such as body gesture, sign, sound, etc. are also used to convey the message. After message, the next step is channel. Here, the sender has to decide how to send the message. In order to convey the message, the sender uses a proper medium or a channel. The medium could be oral or written, depending on the urgency of the message. Some communication medium include phone, letter, emails, and many more. Face-to-face communication is the most effective way of communication. Now, after deciding the channel, the very next step is receiver. Here, receiver is the person who has received the message. He is the person whom the message was sent by the sender. Once the receiver received the message and understand it in a proper perspective and act according to the message, then the purpose of communication is successful. After receiver, the very next step is decoding. Here, the receiver interprets the message and try to understand it in the best possible manner. An effective communication occurs if the receiver understands the message exactly the same way as the sender has sent. After decoding, the very next step is feedback. Feedback is the last step of communication process. Here, the receiver will provide feedback in the form of reply to the original sender of the message. Feedback is the final step of the process that assures that receiver has received the message and interpreted it correctly as it was intended by the sender. The response of the sender can be oral or written. Once the receiver confirms to the sender that he has received the message and understood it, the process of communication is complete. Now, we have discussed all about the communication process. Now my friend Nitin will help you to understand the communication process with an example.
Now let us understand the communication process with the help of an illustration. Let's say the sender is Neerav and the receiver is Neha. And Neerav wants to convey a message to Neha. Now here the first stage of the process will be Neerav will have an idea or thought. Let's say he has an idea to watch a movie with Neha. Now, the Neerav will encode this idea into a message. Let's say the message is, "Hello Neha, let us go and watch KGF 2 movie next Friday." Now Neerav will choose the appropriate channel, which in his case is his mobile phone. Now he calls and conveys this message to Neha. Now this message has entered the sensory world of Neha. She decodes it and understands what Neerav is trying to say. After assigning her meaning to the message, Neha responds Neerav in the form of feedback. Neha says, "Sure, why not? It is a great movie. We'll go in the evening." Now she uses the same medium, which is her phone, and feedback is received by the Neerav, which is sender. So, this is how one communication cycle completes. The communication process may continue as long as two people wish to communicate. Sometimes this process is obstructed by noise and barriers, which causes communication gap, which we will understand in the next upcoming slides. Our last topic is communication gap. Now, communication gap is when the meaning intended by the speaker or sender is not what is understood by the recipient or the receiver. Now, all of us converse in our everyday life, but does the receiver understand our message completely in the right sense? No. Why does this happen? This happens mainly due to communication gap. Now, what causes this gap? What are the reasons for it? There could be n number of reasons, but the main reasons to communication gaps are the barriers. Let us see some of the barriers. First is cultural and language barriers, perceptual barriers, physical barriers, and emotional barriers. Let us understand each of the barrier in detail. The first is cultural and language barrier. Cultural barriers are challenges to cross-cultural communication within an organization. Now, in an organization, there can be people from different countries or different cultural backgrounds. Now, when the people from different cultures who might speak different languages, have different cultural belief and use different gestures and symbols to communicate, their cultural differences might become barriers to workplace success. As you can see in the picture, all these people from different countries have their own way of saying hello. Now, if these all people work in the same organization, it can cause a communication gap among them. The next is perceptual barriers. Perceptual barriers are the mental blocks that we create because of the perception that we have of certain people. If you go into a situation thinking that the person you are talking to isn't going to understand or be interested of what you have to say, you may end up subconsciously ruining your effort to make your point. Now, in a business, a new employee may hesitate to ask question to a strict boss, thereby creating a gap and increasing the chances of error. Now, did you see in the picture? An object is lying on the ground, and different person have perceived it differently. The person on the left thinks it's a 8. The person on the extreme right thinks it's a DNA. What do you think? What is it? The next is physical barriers. Now, physical barriers are the most common barriers which obstruct the communication process and creates communication gap. Now, physical barriers can be caused due to distance between the sender and receiver. It can be because of the noise, or it can also be due to the poor network connectivity. The next is emotional barriers. Now, emotional barriers to communication are usually due to lack of emotional awareness or control. Emotional states such as anger, stress, insecurity can make the communication process difficult. Now let's see what causes communication gap at workplace. The most common reason of communication gap at workplace is fear. This fear is when an employee is engaged in communicating with other employee who has a higher position in the hierarchy. Now, subordinate may also feel fear in speaking with their bosses or supervisors. Since they develop the sense of fear, they can't pay attention properly to what is being communicated. Next reason is mistrust. If there is mistrust between two employees or groups, communication gap emerges because either of them does not want to convey proper message or does not convey the message at all. The next reason is body language and tone. Maintaining body language as well as tone in an acceptable manner while communicating is one of the most important things to do in the workplace. Improper body language or tone not only creates the communication gaps, but it also leads to the aggrieved feelings. As a result of this, there develops an unhealthy competition between the employees. The last is attitude of disgust or hatred. This attitude is bad for employees and damaging to the organization. What could happen in such situation is that sort of attitude reflects in words leading to dirty conversation among the employees. It might go to an extent of physical combat sometimes. Now, every problem has solutions to it. So is the case with the communication gap. Active listening, avoiding assumption, using right medium, use of non-verbal communication, and transparency at workplace can help us to bridge the communication gap and nurture new relationships. This brings us to the end of our journey of components and process of communication and communication gap. Now, before saying goodbyes, we have a short video clip for you on communication gap.
Four candles.
4 candles. Here you are. 4 candles.
No, 4 candles.
Well, there you are. 4 candles.
No, 4 candles. Handles for forks.